Hi loves, this is our thesis statements in argument writing lecture. So I'm going to start out by showing you just our school-wide argument rubric and show you kind of where this lies in the categories. So you can see over here that that thesis statements are a significant part of idea development and developing a topic. They're right here. It says a proficient student introduces a precise claim, argument, or thesis. And this applies to many different kinds of writing, but in many classes and different kinds of writing classes. But for this particular essay, we are going to be taking a look at what we're going to be working on. So the definition of an argumentative paper makes a claim about a topic and justifies this claim with specific evidence. The claim could be an opinion, a policy proposal, an evaluation, a cause and effect statement, or an interpretation. The goal of the argumentative paper is to convince the audience that the claim is true based on the evidence provided. Now, there is a fine line between an argument and a persuasion, and both of them are there to convince you of something using claim. But we're going to take a look at the difference right here. So a persuasive writing piece aims to persuade readers that stated position is correct and that the writer wants to win over the reader, often by appealing to emotions. This would relate back to our work with rhetoric, maybe using a little bit of pathos and really trying to tap into their sense of ethos and getting them to trust you, which is an important part of the persuasive genre. But what we're focusing more on is not necessarily winning over the audience or the reader, but making sure that we give a strong claim with sufficient evidence and valid reasoning and let them decide without trying to persuade them necessarily using the kinds of techniques that we've learned with rhetoric. So how do we move from the research question that we developed to our thesis statement? These are the 4 bullets that I'm going to focus on in this lecture. We're going to look at how you use preliminary research to guide you. We're going to look at both free writing and listing your main subtopics that you've discovered. We're going to look at how to consider the other side of the argument, how to be specific and cover only what you'll discuss and support in your paper, and also how fluid thesis statements can be, that you might write one at the beginning of your paper and it may look quite different by the end because of the nature of a research paper being not necessarily linear but a little bit more organic. So let's take a look at the first way of getting to what your claim is in an argument writing or your thesis. It sometimes helps me to write a little bit about what I think about all of the stuff that I've researched so far. So I included just a little bit of what I've been thinking about. So it's always bothered me that I feel like I can't create lesson plans for you guys that engage your imaginations, because I always have to do X, Y, or Z, or I have to get to this, or we have to do this rhetorical analysis. And so after I began my research and I've really kind of started to dive in and discover and explore a little bit, what I've realized is that my gut feeling that imagination is so important is actually true based on research. And even though teaching to higher standards is fair and rigorous for students, makes it, it raises the bar for them, it is really important to maintain a culture of imagination in the classroom. And what I've realized is that it can actually be a little bit detrimental to students if they don't have the ability to exercise their imagination. So that's where I am so far, and when I look back at that free write, I can find my claim in there, and I'll show you what I mean a little bit later. You can also approach it just by listing the kinds of subtopics that you've discovered in your research. So if you've noticed some categories, let's look at my question again. In what ways has the 21st century standards-based movement affected imagination and creativity in the classroom? Well, I can ask myself, which direction did my research take me? And what I've discovered through my initial research is that standardization has permeated or been a really important part of education, but it's also taken away a little bit of teacher freedom. With an over-focus on skills, teachers have had less room to use imagination. I've learned that imagination is really important for learners and that there are ways that teachers can keep imagination alive in the classroom. So going back to my idea of taking a stand or making a change, I can really think about what is it that I can do. I can take a stand, but also maybe I can help make a change with my argument paper. So the second bullet that I introduced in the beginning was to consider the other side of the argument, and I have led you to do this through requiring you to have at least one source so far where you look at the other side of the argument. I mean, there's always another side of your argument, even if it seems very obvious that you're right. So you have to find it, research it, and acknowledge it. So with mine, I think that there's a lot of negative talk about standards-based education, but I know that in theory it's a good thing, or else it wouldn't have been so significant to our culture. So I found in my research that standards bring higher expectations and rigor for all students, and that the idea that every student can achieve is, if given the opportunity and time, is there, which I think is wonderful. So I'm going to acknowledge that. I'm also going to acknowledge that standards ensure curriculum, or what is taught, that it's the same in every classroom. Then that kind of really ensures equal opportunity for students, so that if you have one teacher, you're not going to just not learn something because you had that teacher and not another teacher. So there are some good parts of standards-based education, and I had to search for them so that I could make my argument not seem so one-sided. The third bullet is to look at, when you're writing your thesis statement, is to be specific. So you don't want a thesis that is too general. For example, I could say that the standards movement is negative. That's way too broad. I could probably write 3 books about that, maybe even more. So I want to keep thinking of that. I want to go a little bit more specific, but then I don't want to go too specific into one of my research subtopics. For example, I found that No Child Left Behind was one of the big drives for standards-based education. So I could claim that No Child Left Behind is the sole reason that students are not allowed creativity in the 21st century high school classroom. But that's way too specific, and I couldn't very well write very much about that, maybe a couple of paragraphs only. Now what that could be is one of my subtopics. So I have to think of that. So I've gone too broad, too specific, so I have to find a specific and focused statement that reflects what I will reveal. That's not too specific. So this is what I've settled on. I acknowledge with my subordinating clause here at the beginning, although the current trend of education promotes standard-based learning, teachers must continue to focus on the importance of imagination in the classroom. I'm not bringing in a persuasive element. I'm not using loaded or emotive language. I am just stating my argument and revealing what I will discuss. So that is my example for this particular paper. The last bullet that I want to talk about is that you can't be afraid to revise your thesis statement. Writing, as I said in the beginning of this, is an organic process. Papers can move in a different direction than you originally thought. Maybe you find a new source that spins you in a different direction and you create something totally new. You have to stop and check yourself, go back to your thesis statement and ask, is my paper really explaining and developing what I initially said in my first paragraph or in my thesis? So you may need to revise your thesis statement 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 times as you are writing your paper to reflect exactly what you have discussed in the paper. So that is the end of the argument thesis lesson. If you have further questions, obviously feel free to contact me and we'll talk about it in class.